Hi there. Are we capable as humans of judging anything correctly? It's a worthwhile question to ask, since as humans we do spend a lot of time judging things, and it's worthwhile to consider whether it's even possible for us to judge things correctly. For this discussion, I'm going to focus on the law of entropy, which is based upon the foundation of the second law of thermodynamics. The second law of thermodynamics states that in any closed system, entropy, disorder, tends to increase over time. There is a premise hidden in this law which needs closer examination. The point I'm going to focus on is the phrase, in any closed system. Do we know with certainty that closed systems exist? If one accepts the idea that everything is connected to everything in a web of cause and effect, then closed systems don't exist. The everything is expanding, right? There are new events emerging at the present moment which influence the system as a whole, right? The system is never closed for business. It is never stagnant. Here is a thought experiment to consider with logic and reasoning. It concerns cause and effect. Can a cause be a cause without its effect? We call something the cause because it affected another event to transpire. But would the cause still be a cause had the event that was its effect not happened? No. To be a cause, the cause is reliant on its effect every bit as much as the effect is reliant on its cause. Through this logical reasoning, we can see the law of entropy in reverse. We can watch the video in rewind and experience revelations about the effects. Specifically, we can better understand their causes. But there are hidden variables. There might have been a gust of wind, for instance, that pushed something slightly off its intended course. We can't see all the causes and all the effects because our perception is limited. We can't see all the forces that acted upon the system to eventually affect its present state, such as its present position in space and time. We have incomplete information at our disposal, so we can't understand the whole truth of cause and effect. Here's another thought experiment. You know that by looking at your family tree, when viewed from the vantage point of marching backwards through time, it appears to have more causes rather than less. The existence of your two parents was required for you to exist, but you needed 4 grandparents to have existed for you to exist. You also needed to have 8 great-grandparents to have existed for you to exist, and onward and ad infinitum, right? Now suppose that several generations ago in this chain a tragic event occurred. The farther up the family tree you go, the greater the probability of this being the case. So let's come up with a hypothetical situation. Say that your great-great-great-grandmother was supposed to go on an outing with her class from school one day. During the outing, she walked up to sit on a rock on a hill above where the rest of her classmates were. Unbeknownst to her, the rock was unstable, and when she sat down on it, she shifted it from its position and it started to roll down the hill. It ended up crushing the boy that your great-great-great-grandmother was pining over. He was pining over her too, and had been intending to ask her to marry him soon. Objectively speaking, it was a tragic event, right? But from your perspective, maybe not. 3 years later, she met the man who would eventually become identified as your great-great-great-grandfather. They went on to conceive a child, who went on to conceive a child, who went on to conceive a child, who then conceived you. So it is safe to conclude that you would not exist had that rock not been displaced and crushed that boy. Relatively speaking, you can be very grateful that the rock rolled down the hill and crushed that boy, because if it hadn't happened that way, you wouldn't exist. But we can't see this. We can't know this because our perception is limited. We only experience things with our senses, and our senses are limited in that they don't see, hear, taste, smell, or feel absolutely everything. Nope. They just see a small slice of the pie. They go with us wherever we go. So chance is an idea that, when conceived of in this way, can be reduced to a statement of our ignorance of the whole picture of cause and effect. Things can appear to have happened by chance, but if we had the ability to see everything, we would be able to explain exactly why it happened, and so it wouldn't have happened just by chance. Chance is nothing more than an admission of our ignorance, but we don't see it that way from our limited perspective. This is why we can't perceive the whole of the web of everything. That is, it's simply impossible, given the restraints of our sensory perception. Our sensory system is responsible for our experience of the world. Intuition plays a very important role too in our experience of the world, but many of us see it as inappropriate or dangerous to make too many inferences. But the point I'm making is that we can't judge anything correctly from sensory perception alone because of themselves they are incomplete. If we can't judge anything correctly, then our judgments will likely be based on incorrect assumptions. Logic tells us this is so. Harken back to my analogy of the garden hose that is mistakenly perceived as a snake. When we act on things from these judgments which are formed from incomplete knowledge, we base our decisions on things that we assume to be true. But because we are mistaken, those actions could be viewed as inappropriate, just as it is objectively inappropriate to jump back in fear when you pass a garden hose. The premise of the second law of thermodynamics is incorrect because its premise that closed systems exist is incorrect. Were there such a thing as a closed system, the law would hold, but that is wishful thinking. Misperceptions influence systems, creating distortions in truth, all the time, constantly, and everywhere in the world. The world is not a closed system, and there are no closed systems within the world that we know. There's a guy out these days who thinks that taking actions that promote self-isolation and self-reliance is a good means for making America great again. He thought that if he put tariffs on imports from other countries, that it would strengthen our industry here. So he slapped some tariffs on Canada and Mexico. He imagined our car manufacturing system as a closed system, but it is not. Those car plants have a receiving division. The receiving division receives parts manufactured in other countries, and these parts are essential to the manufacturing of the car. The car needs all of its parts, right? Without a steering wheel, we won't be able to steer the car, and without all the parts of the brake system, we won't be able to stop the car in time to avoid collisions with other cars. By slapping a tax on these parts, we have now made the parts more expensive, so the resulting car will be more expensive. This is because the company that makes the car transfers the tariff tax to the consumer to pay. The company does this because primarily they are beholden to their stockholders and their stockholders' profits, according to the ethos of capitalism as we have conceived of it here. So what we get is more expensive cars, or no cars at all if the manufacturer didn't decide to pay the higher price for the parts. The guy who made this decision to put tariffs on Canada and Mexico didn't see the larger picture. The stock market did, and reacted to this decision by plummeting 1,300 points in 2 days. I would guess that some very intelligent person found an intelligent way to get through to this guy that his plan for making America great again through tariffs wasn't fully thought out, and that bad things were likely going to happen as an effect of this decision. This guy then kicked that can down the road again. He reversed course, saying the tariffs wouldn't go into effect until April 2nd, which gives us time to figure out how to manufacture all the parts we need to be a real closed system. The stock market reacted to this yesterday by correcting for some of its losses from the previous 2 days. But the guy who came up with the tariff idea, and who is quite emotionally attached to the rightness of tariffs, I think, thought that all we needed is a month to turn our system into a closed system, one that is not dependent on external parts being supplied to it. A month should do it, right? Not right. I don't imagine that's realistic. It might just be wishful thinking on his part. He really wants what he's saying to be true. He is emotionally attached to the idea that he is right, and that he is the smartest guy in the room, as they say. Those cars require a lot of parts from a lot of foreign places to be manufactured, and a month is not enough time to set up the infrastructure here in our country to manufacture all those parts we would need to make complete cars on our own. Quote, "The ego tries to exploit all situations into forms of praise for itself, to overcome its doubts. It will be doubtful forever, or better, as long as you believe in it. You who made it cannot trust it, because you know it is not real. The only sane solution is not to try to change reality, which is indeed a fearful attempt, but to see it as it is. You are part of reality, which stands unchanged beyond the reach of your ego, but within easy reach of your spirit." End quote. The ego's beliefs are unstable because the ego's belief system rests on a thought that isn't true. The ego wants things to work the way it wants them to work. That's called wishing. But the ego doesn't get to determine how things work. Things just work the way they work. And we are also not our egos. We have another guide, the Holy Spirit, to inform our actions and behaviors. Quote, "What you do not understand is that two voices speak for different interpretations of the same thing simultaneously, or almost simultaneously, for the ego always speaks first. Alternate interpretations are unnecessary until the first one has been made, and speaking itself was unnecessary before the ego was made. The ego speaks in judgment, and the Holy Spirit reverses its decisions, much as a Supreme Court has the power to reverse a lower court's decisions about the laws of this world." End quote. If our Supreme Court is being influenced by the Holy Spirit rather than the ego, then yes, it works great. If it's guided by the ego, it will compound the mistakes rather than correct them. The other day, our Supreme Court was being influenced by the Holy Spirit when it ordered the same guy to unfreeze the funds it had frozen, which were intended for U.S. aid. This was, perhaps, yet another admission of the reality that we are all interdependent and interconnected. More evidence that when America gets a cold, people in other countries die from it. This was a correction for that. Unlike our Supreme Court, the Holy Spirit is invulnerable to misjudgments because it does see everything, and because it sees everything, it does judge things correctly. It does know that everything is connected through a vast entangled web of cause and effect. We must ask the Holy Spirit for its guidance in order to receive its guidance. The Holy Spirit does not offer unsolicited guidance because it knows that if we are not asking for something, we probably don't want it. We have to stop listening to the guidance of the ego to be willing to hear the Holy Spirit's guidance, because the ego always speaks first, and the ego is nothing more than that part of ourselves that wishes what isn't true were true. I also want to share that I put a link to a video from The Daily Show that appeared today as a little bit of comic relief about the absurdity of this tariff situation. So take a look at it if you're just tired of all this seriousness.